Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Medicine Show. As I record this, it is February of 2020, and viral illnesses and contagious infectious diseases are very much in the news right now. So that's a little bit about what I'm going to be talking about in this episode, is herbal support for people who are experiencing or are exposed to these types of viruses. My name is Andrew Bentley, and I'm an herbalist here in Lexington, and I wanted to talk some about viruses, something that's been in the news a lot lately, right, and also in the community a lot lately, and some of the things that we can do about them. But first I wanted to just talk a little bit about what they are, and because there seems to be some confusion and that sort of thing around the subject. So viruses in general, there are lots of viruses and they're everywhere all the time, and most of them don't cause any problems or do anything significant as far as human health goes. They just kind of are around and they live in our bodies, and most of them don't really cause a lot of trouble. But what they are structurally is they have a protein casing, and then inside that they have some genetic material, either DNA or RNA. They attach themselves to cells of the human body and inject that genetic material into the cell, where it makes clones of the virus using material from the cell. And then once it's done that, the cell cracks open. The cell's kind of like an egg. It has an outer shell, sort of, a membrane, and then it has the liquid inside it, and then the nucleus at the center. So they get in the middle of that, and they use up the protein and other resources from the cell, and to make more copies of themselves. And then they break the cell open, which results in there being some debris, kind of like cracked eggs. So when you get sick with a virus, what's going on is two things. One is an immune response to the virus, which is usually a lot of what you would associate with, say, a flu-like illness: sneezing, fever, congestion, mucus, all that sort of thing. And then the other possibility, which is really the more dangerous of the two, is that all that cellular debris that's being created by your own cells breaking is a fertile ground for bacteria, which are also in the environment all the time, to form a secondary bacterial infection. They'll grow on those broken cells, on the nutrients from those broken cells, and give you pneumonia. And so a lot of the time, that's what actually, if somebody dies of the flu or a cold, a lot of the time that's actually what they're dying of, is pneumonia from a secondary infection. People can die of the actual immune response too, and that's what you see in some varieties of the flu, for instance, like the Spanish flu epidemic in 1918. A lot of what was going on there was people were dying. Younger people were dying more often than older people because their strong immune systems were having too strong of a response, and that was killing them. Also, physicians at the time were horribly mismanaging the condition and making things worse. A lot of other factors. So this is an illustration showing approximately what a virion, a single piece of an influenza virus, looks like. And these colors are not actual colors. They're just to make it easier to look at, easier to see what's what. So the blue structures here are a protein called hemagglutinin, and the reddish or pinkish one are a different protein called neuraminidase. So sometimes if you see people talking about different strains of the flu, they'll have names like H1N1 or H5N1. The H and N stand for these two different types of proteins on the surface of the cell. And then underneath that, you can see the yellowish color, which is the capsule. And then in this cutaway inside the capsule, you can see the genetic material. This is called RNP, ribonucleoprotein, and it consists of RNA, which is the actual genes of the virus, and then some proteins that are attached to it that help it
to do what it needs to do in order to replicate the virus. And this one is coronavirus, and of course the coronavirus has been a lot in the news recently, but there are hundreds of different types of coronavirus, and most of them cause something like a common cold, if they cause anything at all in humans. And the one that's going around now, or the SARS, which went around several years ago, have more intense outcomes. More of the people who have them end up seriously ill. But as you can see, compared to the flu virus that we just looked at, it's a very similar type of situation. You have a protein capsule. In the middle of it, you have the RNA and its attached protein. And then you have what really gives the coronavirus its distinctive shape that it's named after. It's like shaped like a crown. That's what the word corona means. So it's got these spikes on it, and the spikes consist of a glycoprotein, which is sort of a hybrid between a starch and a protein. And then it has hemagglutinin and esterase dimer also. So different proteins than what the influenza virus has, but a very similar setup and similarly adapted to be a respiratory virus that is something that lives in and is transmitted between the respiratory systems of its host organisms. So when someone's sick, viral particles like this are coming out in their mucus and perhaps other fluids, and waiting for a chance to get from their respiratory system into the respiratory system of someone who breathes them in or gets it on their hands and then touches, wipes their nose or something like that. And that's how they get transmitted from one person, or in the case of sometimes one animal, to the next. So now I want to talk about some of the things that you can do to help yourself and those around you stay well and regain your wellness if you were to get sick. And in just a minute, I'll talk about some of the medicinal herbs that can be used to help the body through this type of situation. But first, I want to cover some very basic measures that are extremely important in this situation. Frequent hand washing is probably the biggest step that you can take to keep yourself from contracting a respiratory virus or passing one on to somebody else. So that means washing your hands in moving water for 20 seconds or so with friction, actually physically removing any material, any bodily fluids, any mucus or anything like that might be on your hand, so that the viruses aren't there anymore. A squirt of hand sanitizer is just not the same thing. It's not going to get every surface of your hands. It might render some of the viruses inactive, but it's not going to physically remove them from your hands the way that actual hand washing would do. So really developing this as a habit and a practice and carrying it out faithfully is a very, very important step. And if you're taking care of someone who is sick, it's even more important. Wearing a respirator and gloves, or mask and gloves, is not a terrible idea, especially if you are around a lot of people who have respiratory viruses. If you're in an area where there's a lot of viral activity happening, it can be helpful. It's basically the respirator or mask is filtering out most of the droplets that might be in the air that would contain viruses, and the gloves hopefully are keeping you from getting it on your hands and then transferring it to your nose or your mouth or something like that where it could take hold. So while they're not foolproof measures, they are something that decrease your chances of contracting a virus if it's in your environment. It should be noted, though, that unless you are in close contact with people who are shedding viruses from their bodies, you're not really going to need this. It's not something that is going to do any good unless you're in close contact with people who do have viruses coming out of them. When it comes to herbal remedies to try and support the body in its efforts not to become sick, echinacea is probably the best known herb. It can be effective in that sort of scenario, but it's really not my favorite for that, even though it's very popular and very widely used. This herb right here is usnea. It's a lichen, and it is my personal first line of defense when I'm working with people who are sick, especially with respiratory viruses, and I'm trying not to end up with them myself. It contains some substances that help to nourish and strengthen the immune system, like alpha and beta glucans, which are polysaccharides, sort of special starches that feed the immune system. It also contains a substance called usnic acid, which probably contributes to some antiviral properties. It's definitely antiviral in vitro and appears to be antiviral in animal studies that have been done, and it has a long history of use of being used to ward off illnesses. Another one that I really like is elderberry. There are lots of commercial elderberry products out there. This is some traditional elderberry wine fermenting. I also make it into a vinegar, which is a form that I often dispense medicinally. Elderberries contain polyphenols that appear to be responsible for its ability to decrease the duration and severity of flu-like illnesses in several different clinical trials that have been performed with it. So those substances at least are common not only to elderberry but to most other purple berries and many other fruits in differing degrees. And it's reasonable to suspect that all of them might help your body in its efforts to stay healthy when exposed to viruses. Lemon balm is another one that I really like, especially if somebody has already become ill. Lemon balm can really be helpful because it induces sweating, which helps to keep fevers down. Flu often involves fever, and it helps people to sleep. It may also have some direct activity against viruses, although that is very difficult to measure in real life in a human body. But it is quite helpful to people who are trying to recover from those types of situations. And if you or someone that you're taking care of does become ill with a respiratory virus, the best thing to do is just supportive care and waiting it out. Focus on comfort, staying hydrated, staying warm, using whatever measures you like to use for pain and relief of the symptoms. If you're having a lot of coughing and sneezing, being in a propped up position can be helpful, and getting plenty of rest, because even with the very severe respiratory illnesses that sometimes create pandemics and so forth, the vast majority of people who get them recover just with supportive care and the passage of time. That's it for this time. Thanks for watching, and if you have any questions about viral illnesses, either in general or about the specific situations that are going on in the world right now, feel free to leave a comment in the comments section, and I will get back to you as time permits.
Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on The Medicine Show.